May I remind everybody present that this meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen or use the raise hand function? Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues to the chairman or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard or seen when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. Thank you. Okay, before we start, I just want to apologise for not being able to make it last meeting. I was ill, I had no voice at all. However, I hear our Vice Chair did an excellent job, so I just want to say thank you very much, Belinda, for stepping in. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, Chair, we have two. We've got Councillor Buckley and Mrs. Doyle from the tenant representatives send their apologies.
Okay, Julia, you have something, yes?
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, Chair. It's just for the declaration of interest. So shall I wait or?
Yeah, we need to go through the minutes first.
Oh, sorry,
Okay,
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So those were the only two apologies, were they, Mark? Great.
They're the only two I've had through, Chair, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November. Is everybody happy with those? Is there any amendments that need to be made? Okay, are we happy to move?
Yes, Chair.
And do I have a seconder?
Second.
Wonderful, thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Julie, would you like to come in now?
Oh, yes, thank you. I'd like to declare an interest in agenda item 5 as I am a tenant of the council. Thank you.
All right, no problem. Any other declarations of interest?
Same thing for me, please, Millie, that I'm a tenant on item 5 for the council.
Yeah, no problem. And Belinda, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have a declaration of interest at item 6, the draft older people strategy, as the Vale champion for older people. So I obviously have got an interest there and I'm likely to be asking some questions on that matter.
Okay. So
just to say, Chair, on those matters, because obviously the nature of the declarations of interest, the relevant members can stay in the meeting. They're not prejudicial ones, so they can stay and question, etc. Okay.
I was just about to double check that. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so there has been a slight shift to the agenda this evening. We are actually bringing agenda item 6 up next. So it is the draft older persons housing strategy. It went to Cabinet on the 17th of November 2022. Okay, Nick, I believe you're taking this, yeah?
Yeah,
okay.
Chair, if I can start off, and then I'll pass you over then to you'll notice Ian Copeman and Lois Beach from the consultants Housing Lynn are here tonight, and they'll take you through the detail of the report shortly and sort of help clarify any questions. But before we go with that, I just want to sort of clarify really, this report has been to Cabinet for agreement in principle, and has been referred back to Homes and Safe Communities for more detailed consideration, really. So that's why it's on the agenda tonight. The strategy has been produced to ensure that the council is responding to the housing challenges faced by older people in the Vale Glamorgan. We have a local housing strategy which covers all housing in the Vale. However, in light of both the ageing population that we have in the Vale and also the specific challenges faced by older people, we felt that there was a need for something more specific, more bespoke, if you like, particularly regarding this particular group. So Housing Lynn, as I mentioned briefly there, are specialist consultants in this area. and have carried out sort of similar reviews for other organisations. But they've also, back in 2018, carried out the Older Persons Housing Needs Assessment on behalf of the Cardiff and Vale Regional Partnership Board. So they bring with them some background knowledge and some expertise, particularly in terms of the data, the housing needs information. So we chose Housing Lynn to work with us on this to draft something which meets our requirements. So I'll probably pause there and won't start veering into the detail of the strategy, because that'll be sort of treading on Ian and Lois's toes. So yeah, I'll pass you across. I think Ian, you're starting off, I believe, but I'll not say any more for now.
No, that's thank you, Nick. And can I just check with the chair? We've got a few slides to share with you tonight. Is it okay for us to share?
Absolutely fine.
Okay.
Absolutely fine.
So my colleague Lois will share those probably as I'm speaking now. So thank you and good evening. I'm Ian Copeman from the Housing, Learning and Improvement Network, and with my colleague Lois Beach, we're going to summarise the key elements of the draft strategy that Nick has just kind of set out for you. As Nick said, we've been commissioned to carry out an assessment of local housing needs in relation to older citizens and to assist officers at the council to develop this draft older persons housing strategy. So Lois is just going to take you through the approach that we've taken with officers at the council to do that, and with other partners, the vision that's emerged from that and what that means in practice, and then I'll summarise the actions that are set out in the document. So I'll hand over to Lois now.
Thanks, Ian, and nice to meet you all, and see you again, Nick. So yes, I'm just going to take you through the approach to start with. So it was really important to us, the development of the strategy not only looked at the kind of quantitative evidence, so looking at the kind of the existing kind of older persons housing needs assessment and doing an update of that in terms of what kind of demographic changes there are, but also looked at kind of a review of kind of national best practice, what other kind of similar strategies are out there. We noticed there's one other council in Wales that's developed a similar strategy, so looking at kind of how those could work together, but also looked at really importantly spoke to individuals about kind of what they thought would make a good strategy. So we did a number of kind of stakeholder engagement exercises as part of this with kind of third sector organisations, registered providers, council officers, as well as undertaking various kind of visits to sheltered housing schemes as part of this review. So part of the strategy also, we did a kind of review of the sheltered housing stock and some suggestions there. So taking into account our approach, that really enabled us to create a vision that was really focused on the individual. So this kind of first quote here that was really around kind of securing the best quality of life for older people to live independently as possible in later life, which I think we could all agree is something we'd all want. But we really linked that to that sense of quality of life to what this means for people at home. So it's about kind of providing a range of choices that enable people to live independently as they age, whatever their kind of housing circumstances. And that, as I said, that really came especially from the kind of focus groups that we did. So in terms of how this vision can be achieved, there are a number of strands linked to this. So linked to how kind of quality and independence, linked to kind of the people's homes. So on the one hand, it's about kind of supporting people where they live now. So, whether that's through kind of aids and adaptations or support services, community services. We know through qualitative research that we do elsewhere that the majority of older people want to remain living in their homes for as long as possible rather than moving. But also, on the other hand, you do have, a significant minority that are thinking about a move. So the vision is we're seeking to achieve that vision by providing mechanisms to support people to move, whether that's around kind of creating better housing choices, but also kind of more practical support with moving and information and advice about how to go about it. Another kind of strand is around focusing on community, so thinking beyond just the bricks and mortar of housing, but how community can support independence and well-being, as well as kind of ensuring that housing reflects kind of some of the diverse groups that are within the Vale. And lastly, just linking in with kind of making sure the role of housing is really closely linked to health and social care as well. I'll just hand over to Ian to take you through the actions. I think you just need to unmute yourself, Ian.
Thank you. Sorry. As Lois said, so we've set out arranged with colleagues a range of kind of actions in the strategy that are about putting that vision into practice, and they cover a range of aspects. So one is for the council to review its own sheltered housing services, obviously in consultation with residents, to ensure that the council's own provision of housing services is attractive to older people and meets kind of contemporary standards, and will be a kind of relevant housing offer both now and in the future. And in addition, the council will encourage its local RSL partners with sheltered housing to review their services as well if they haven't already done so. Reflecting what Lois said, it's also about enabling the development of new, kind of more contemporary housing that's suited to older people, as well as additional extra care housing over and above that already exists across all 3 localities in the Vale. And that would include proceeding with the development of the retirement village or care village in Penarth in particular. It also means using planning policy quite deliberately to encourage both private and social housing providers to develop a range of mainstream housing, so not specialist housing, but mainstream housing that is suitable and attractive to older people. That might be things like bungalows, but it could be a range of kind of different types of housing and of different tenures that would be attractive to older people to move to. And then in practice, that means working with both RSL, social landlords, and private house builders, given that the majority of older people in the Vale are homeowners, to develop a supply of new and adapted, and in some cases purpose-built homes that will meet the needs of your older population over the next sort of 10 to 20 years. You can move on to the next slide, Lois. And then, as Lois said, there's a range of other kind of factors that will also assist with implementing the strategy, including the council considering how to expand the range of housing options, information and advice services to older people, so that people have good quality information to base their decisions upon about where they might live in the future, whether they stay put or whether they choose to move. Some of that will be about increasing the number of older people who potentially are supported to take up adaptations, particularly if, a significant minority or a significant number of older people want to remain living in their own homes, and about maximising their independence in order to do so. In some instances, it might mean working with some of your RSL partners to look at quite specific community-led housing. So that's kind of housing developments where the sort of specification and delivery actively involves kind of older people in that process in a way that perhaps that doesn't happen with some other types of housing development. There's also an opportunity, as Lois referred to, in terms of sort of integration with housing and social care, to take the opportunity of the digital switchover in 2025 to enhance the range of kind of telecare options that are available both in specialist housing but also in mainstream housing, so that enables more people to remain independent in their own homes through both an upgrade to the existing kind of community alarm type services, but a whole range of other kind of digital kind of health and care based technologies. And then finally, it's about developing the role of housing potentially in supporting hospital discharge for older people where that's appropriate. And as part of that approach, the council will, with its NHS partners, review the use of the existing what are called step-down units that exist in the sheltered housing scheme in Cowbridge. Okay. Well, that's the end of our presentation. Is it helpful if we take those slides down now for the question and discussion? Yeah, so if you could just take those down, Lois, thank you.
Yeah, it may make it easier to see if anybody's got their hands up.
Indeed.
Yeah, let me just figure out how to
Okay.
do that. It's not as obvious as it has been previously. I'll stop it.
Okay. Nick, are you going to come back in on that before I take questions, or are you happy for me to take questions?
Yeah, happy for you to go straight into questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will now open the floor up. Anybody have any questions? I thought you might, Belinda. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for that summary, which and thanks for the document itself. I have a couple of points as well, comments as well as questions. The report highlights that the onset of the sort of risk of dementia, or people developing dementia, is likely to double by 2040. So how can the strategy fulfill its brief in terms of one of its aspirations is to ensure that people remain independent in terms of living independently, where we can see that clearly the risk of dementia is going to have an impact on sort of any housing strategy. Can I ask a few more, or do you want to come back individually? Whatever's easiest for everyone.
I think individual questions would be good, because you can get more focused answers that way. Yeah,
fine. So I suppose it's a questions that I don't expect you to give me the solution tonight, because I don't think I'm pragmatic enough. But the document does seem to be light on those specifics, considering it clearly is an issue that most local authorities are going to face with an ageing population, and sort of the complex needs of anyone dealing with dementia. And I just wanted to sort of, considering your plan is linked to 2036, which is quite a period ahead, if that is going to be under review, how will you link into sort of any organisations and sort of like our health colleagues around that? Just a small question to start with.
Well,
thank you.
Possibly I start, Councillor. In terms of this strategy, this is a specific sort of housing strategy. Colleagues in adult services were involved in focus groups and discussions informing this, but clearly there will be strategies in place regarding the delivery of care, which they are putting together as well. So we will hope that our work would complement them. But I suppose the point to make, first of all, is it's a housing strategy more than it is a care strategy, but it will complement strategies and work that is already taking place in adult services, really. Regarding the specifics of dementia, the other thing with the strategy, it is a sort of a vision, and it is an overview rather than sort of a detailed sort of response to every individual document, really. But take your point, if there are possibly gaps or clarifications needed to be added in relation to a specific client group, whether it's dementia or anything else, then this is the opportunity to sort of flag those up and potentially add in anything in as required, really.
Okay, thank you. No, that's really valuable. Thank you. And the second point is around the private house builders, and the plan talks about working with, and so I'd be interested to know what engagement has already started, and is the plan likely to go a little bit further than what it actually is written down in terms of explicit accountability with those private house builders in terms of providing the affordable and accessible housing for the future that clearly this strategy has highlighted is needed? Because again, I appreciate that this is just a starting document, but it would be interesting to know if those discussions with private house builders have already started, taking into consideration the evidence within this report demonstrates that the need for adaptable and affordable housing for older generations is going to be much more needed in the future.
Yeah, I'll start. Maybe Ian might want to come in, because I know Ian's aware, and Lo's also aware of sort of discussions nationally with organisations like McCarthy and Stone, and as part of the group we had conversations really about what incentivises them, or what they're looking for from specific sites, or what their return on investment is looking at, and what motivates them to look in certain areas and not in other areas, really. In respect to the position in the Vale, our SPG, our supplementary planning guidance in relation to affordable housing, sets out the terms of reference there for developers working. So I know we've had interest recently from McCarthy and Stone in relation to a site in Cowbridge, and there will be certain requirements we would expect as part of the planning process there regarding the mix of affordable housing, the split between low cost home ownership and social rented, etc. But in terms of channels of communication with the private developers, we have private developers or are linked on our overarching housing forum, and there's representation there, but it's not regular and often and frequent dialogue. Really, it is more driven around specific sites and opportunities they're interested in progressing. So we'll talk to them about the terms of those sites rather than more general conversations about what we would like them to do in an area. So I don't know if you wanted to come in and comment more generally on the approach of the private house builders in relation to different areas.
Yes, of course, Nick. I think there's probably two aspects in terms of a response to your question, Councillor. One is mainstream house builders, so not the specialists, so organisations that are just building market housing, and the extent to which I think in the strategy it talks about influencing planning policy, and planning policy requires kind of like a robust evidence base, as you know. So this is part of providing that evidence base so that the council is setting out very clearly, both to private house developers, but also your RSL partners, what your expectations are in terms of things like housing mix and the extent to which you expect to see housing that is developed to be more responsive to an ageing population. In relation to the sort of specialist market housing providers, and Nick mentioned McCarthy and Stone, and obviously there are others. What we've seen in England is that McCarthy and Stone have recently partnered with a housing association partner, Anchor Housing. I think they've done that because obviously usually those types of housing, those specialist housing providers do not want to provide affordable housing as part of their developments, and they'll agree sometimes to kind of off-site contributions and so on. So I think the reason they've done that in England is to, I suppose, offer to local authorities both a market housing specialist solution for older people alongside some affordable housing component to it. So I don't think that they've entered into an equivalent partnership with an RSL in Wales, but that might be something that type of private developer, you as a local authority want to kind of take the initiative and try to push them in that direction possibly.
Thank you. Chair, I can see that Councillor Wilson and I thought Mike had their hands up if they wanted to come in and add on that. I'm happy for that if it's part of that.
I was just going to ask Mike Ingram. I saw your hand pop up earlier. Now it's gone again. Did you want to come in? If you want to come in, come on in.
Yeah. Yes, please, Chair. Thank you very much. Firstly, the point that Ian has just made with regard to the evidence base, in the same way as our local housing market assessment is the evidence base for our SPG on affordable housing. We've already had conversations with colleagues in our planning department around ensuring that the evidence base is used in our current review of the LDP. We've had some conversations around policy areas in other local authorities. So, for example, I've heard concerns with regard to not just new build, but also some of our planning policy around adaptations of existing ground floor accommodation and particularly bungalows. I think it was Brighton Council or one of the councils in the southeast were looking at policy around preventing dormer type extensions to existing ground floor accommodation because effectively it was taking away what was perceived to be a resource that older owner occupiers traditionally would have been looking for in order to deal with things like the mobility needs. However, interestingly, policy development might be along the lines of developing bungalows with the ability for carers to reside within those homes in a dormer style setting. So just to really amplify the point that Ian was making. This doesn't give us all the answers. It will allow some of our other stakeholders the evidence base on which now to look to formulate some policy responses in those areas. Equally, I just wanted to come back on the first point that you raised around dementia, and of course part of our strategy at the moment is to look at extra care provision within the authority's boundary, and clearly what we're looking at there is the ability for a housing career, for want of a better term, within that central within that setting. So people obviously accessing with a variety, low level need perhaps, but then as they reach later years, as perhaps issues around dementia setting, there isn't the additional upheaval of moving to more specialist accommodation in later life, which obviously is unsettling to the individual and unsettling to the families who may be supporting that person. I'm not sure if I'm going to steal Councillor Wilson's thunder, but we will have a very good example of that in Penarth, where we have a specialist setting, obviously currently in Tydewi Sand, which will be next to a traditional sheltered scheme, next to what will be a brand new all bells, whistles, extra care scheme. And of course, what we're looking to do there is to ensure that those people in the Lower Penarth area can remain in the Lower Penarth area where all their connection support networks and family, relatives and friends are. And just on the final point around the sort of so what question, which I guess is what we're saying. So what? It's nice having strategy, but what does that mean in practice? There are other pieces of work going on at the moment in other areas. So Nick mentioned the RPB. One of the key priorities of the Regional Partnership Board is around older persons and provision of accommodation. I sit on the RPB executive group, leadership group, and of course we're able to access some additional funding and some specifically under the old integrated care fund banner, which has been rebadged more recently. But the focus of that work is around how do we dovetail the health and social care needs, but to provide the housing in order to facilitate that piece of work. And of course, Ian mentioned the use, or Lois mentioned the use of technology, AI, and of course we would want to see that in our extra care schemes as well as we go forward. I think what we wanted and what we get out of the report is an indication of numbers and where those numbers need to be located. And I suppose the work that we can then influence with our RSLs and with our planning colleagues is when we have planning applications that come in, and we can obviously direct through the SPG network that Nick mentioned, then we can influence. So this is the start of the process, not the end of the process. And clearly there are other areas that we will need to look at, including, I think has been mentioned, our own provision. Our own provision is what, 30, 40 years old, some of our schemes. We've tried in some of them to remodel, but I guess, nearing the age group that Ian's report speaks to, which is generally 60 plus, but nearing that sort of age myself, I suppose you beg the question, would I see myself living in some of that accommodation as is currently developed? Probably not. And the other factor is the vast proportion of the older person population are owner occupiers and they want to stay in their own homes. And therefore the focus clearly is about ensuring that can happen. And we have processes that we're looking at the moment as a council. We're looking at our access to disabled facilities grants, for example. We're looking at the potential of making that easier, reducing the means test or eliminating the means test for low-level adaptations, but making that a much more level playing field across all the different types of tenures across the Vale. And that's a piece of work that's going on in the background, and I'm sure colleagues in social services will be coming back with that information in the fairly near future. Sorry to, but I thought it was just worth just making that point.
No,
Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, I can see we have 4 other people waiting, one of which is Councillor Wilson. I just want to check, Councillor Wilson, were you coming back in answer to a question, or do you have your own question to ask? Because if you do, I need to ask committee members to go first.
I have my own observations rather than questions.
Okay, so I'll bring you in after the committee members have spoken. Okay, thank you. All right, Councillor Hanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's a question to Nick or Mike. I just wondered if I could have some more information about the Penarth Retirement Care Village. We read a lot about it, but I'm not really aware of how far ahead we are with it and how many people you're hoping to accommodate in it, and a timescale for the end. And also, if I could ask a second question, it's about the step-down units. I think it's in Longmeadow Court in Cowbridge, which many years ago members visited. And I'd just be interested to see if it's more than the 1 unit and what sort of is the average length of stay in that unit. Thank you.
If I pick up on the first point, the extra care scheme in Penarth went to planning committee last meeting and was approved. And officers, including the project manager, are meeting with Wales and the West Housing Association, who are going to develop that scheme to now develop the project plan going forward. The intention was that we should and hope to have been on site before the end of this financial year. However, I think we all understand there are some difficulties at the moment in relation to house building capacity, costs. So we're in the process of reviewing the project plan going forward. So I don't have a committed start date for you, other than to say that everything is in place for the development to commence, and it's just a case now, I guess, of Wales and the West of tendering the work, obviously getting a contractor, and we'll come back to this committee, I'm sure, with regular updates in due course to let you know how things are going. In terms of the second point, I think Nick is possibly better placed to perhaps respond to the Longmeadow step-down situation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. There are 2 units, 2 step-down units at Longmeadow Court. The maximum length of stay is prescribed by the funding is 12 weeks, but it's fair to say sometimes the take-up of the occupancy rates of the units are lower than we would like, really. So I think we're discussing with colleagues in social service and in the health service as well regarding how we get the best use out of those units. Because I think one of the things that has risen previously is there was a choice element and people were choosing not to go there. And the whole point of the units was to sort of ease bed blocking and ease pressure on hospital beds, really. So if there was opportunities to move people out into those units and they weren't taking it up, that clearly was something that we wanted to explore further. So they do get used, and we've got units also in Redlands House in Penarth, which tend to be more popular. I don't know if that's because they're proximity to Cardiff or there's a higher concentration of people in Penarth, but clearly we want to maximise the use of those units, really, in order to get people out of hospital.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, sort of with the this strategy, do we know which we're going to be able to easily implement first? Sort of what is the sort of process that you're going to actually use to try and implement some of this first? How long will that take? And also with the sort of census, and as we know, the Vale has one of the highest older people population, and I'm sort of getting there as well. But I wouldn't mind a bungalow, Mike, to be honest. That'd be all right. But this is, there's going to be more older people in the Vale, and how are we going to sort of plan for that, put the infrastructure in there, so we can have the infrastructure in for the older people's village, but how do we put the infrastructure in if they're staying in their own homes to ensure that they can still get around and things like that? Okay, thank you.
At the back of the strategy, the action plan, it hasn't, the dates on there haven't yet been finalised. So that's a piece of work that needs to be done. Clearly, there are some things that will be done sooner. Some things are more sort of aspirational. So we do need to populate that action plan at the back, really. The Penarth older persons one, clearly that's already sort of it's achieved planning that's closer to fruition, but the other things will just will take some time. It's hard to be specific about when exactly they will be delivered. The other thing that makes things tricky sometimes in terms of the available social housing grant for new developments. Clearly, we'd like to build a lot of housing for older people across the Vale as soon as we possibly can, but it's limited by the availability of social housing grant. Our allocation per year is at the moment, well, for last year it was £10 million, or for this year's £10 million. We may get some slippage, that may increase, but clearly if that funding is able to deliver X amount of units, that's what we're able to deliver each year, really. So, and when we prioritise older persons accommodation, we're also prioritising single persons accommodation for homeless people, adapted accommodation for families with people with disabilities, etc. So everything's a priority, really, but clearly older persons, the data within the strategy shows that there is a shortfall of accommodation. There is a gap there in terms of new accommodation, and clearly the more that we can spend as well in terms of adaptations and keeping people in their own homes, the better, because the point Mike makes, really, the large number of residents in the Vale already own their own homes and will look to remain in their own homes and supporting them wherever possible to do that.
Mary, is it all right if I ask another question related to that?
Go on, as it's the last one before Christmas.
Okay, thank you. So, so with older people want to stay in their own homes, if they've got family that live within the Vale, who live in their own homes, how are we sort of considering if family want to convert garages and things like that for sort of granny flats and things like that as well? I mean, I suppose that could be more planning than actually yourselves, but sort of, because that would be, they'd still have their independence but being closer to family. And I suppose, yes, you're right, if we can move people along into the old people's places, it frees up property elsewhere if it's RSLs or council housing, so it frees up the sort of the list and helps that to progress. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on sort of perhaps getting them to move into the converted garage or building something if they've got the land and stuff like that.
Yeah. Go on, Mike. You're probably better placed to answer it than me.
Sorry, this has been raised already in terms of issues around planning and planning permissions and conversions of this nature, and I do recall planning colleagues relaxing some of the planning constraints and conditions in circumstances where that is put forward as part of the proposal. And I think the report mentions our existing the direction, I guess, from Welsh Government and under planning policy is mentioned in the report as well. So going back to an earlier point that we made, Councillor Perks, it may well be that our policy will change as a result of this report, or will be clarified. And of course, it's probably it's timely now as we're going through the review of the LDP.
Okay, Councillor Morgan, if you'd like to come in now.
Yeah, well, the point I was going to raise has just been touched on by Councillor Perks and Mike there, because it's, from my viewpoint here, in a rural ward, it's really the concern about what happens to our villages, because so often over the years, modest size homes, bungalows have been expanded as families have expanded to accommodate those families. And then the families leave and you end up with perhaps one widow living in a larger property. And it's often the case that that person does not want to leave the community that he or she might have lived in all of her adult life. But there's simply nowhere for her, or indeed him, to go. I've raised this over the years at planning committee meetings when people have applied to put modest size homes within their own gardens. And I've been often, spoken down to saying, well, no, there's no such thing as retirement housing. There's no policy, planning policy of retirement housing. We've got affordable housing, but we don't have that policy. So it comes back to what Mike was saying, addressing the whole question of policy on these matters, because it's essential for our small communities, because those people who've lived here all that time and are now retired are so valuable in the community for everything they do. They're the volunteers that get on with stuff. And when eventually they make the decision, oh yes, there's nowhere for us to stay in this village, we have to move away to be closer to our family in Reading or wherever it is. And they go away from their friends. They have to make a new home where they don't know anybody except their own family, and their own family might not even want them there. And taking it one step further, if they stay in their homes for too long and they can't cope and they can't manage, and I've seen this so many times, there's an incident, they end up in hospital. From hospital, they're transferred to a care home, and that is the end for them. There's just no current facility. So that's why I welcome this report and all the things that are being discussed to make it easier for all of us to look forward to older life and not to fear it, because an awful lot of people do fear it. In my other day job, I'm meeting people all the time who are terrified at the prospect of ending up in a residential care home. I know some of them are nice, but you just know that once you go into one of those places, you're not coming out again. And it's an awful way to bring somebody's life to a close. We need to look after our elderly people. I'm not one yet, but there's a statistic I remember in a report some years ago. Mike might remember this one, where it said that by 2035, the population of the Vale of Glamorgan aged over 75 will have increased by 70%. It's a lot of older people, and I will be one of those 75-year-olds in 2035 if I'm still here. But wouldn't it be nice if everybody could look forward to having somewhere nice to live and not just live in fear? So my observational question really is, we all need to get behind this report. We really need to look at planning policy, whether it's really through Welsh Government to lobby for this, so that if there is somebody in my village who wants to sell their house, to release it for a family to live in, but then to build a modest single person dwelling within their garden or grounds, then there should be a presumption they can do that, not immediately saying, oh no, we're going to preserve this as an existing community, because those are the people we need in the communities, because otherwise you don't have a broad range of people. And the knock-on effect is that the local businesses suffer, the pubs suffer, because there aren't full communities. It's just, they become almost a dormitory situation. So not a question, but we need to lobby planning, and we need to get behind this report for our older people and for all of us. So that's my little bandwagon. I've been on this for a few years, and I just want to keep this going. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you want to come back in, and then I believe we have Councillor Hennessy waiting. So if you'd like to come in, Belinda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just in relation to the overall premise of the policy, which I agree with. Echo Councillor Morgan's comments. This is a much needed policy, and I think that from an older people's champion perspective, every decision that the council makes, we should be more mindful of the legacy or the future generations and older sort of population, and how the decisions impact on them. And on that, I just wanted to touch on, without being overly pedantic, I didn't want us to fall into the trap, because I can see that a lot of the information that's been gathered is around older people now. And we seem to sometimes fall into the same trap as when we're having discussions around climate. We tend to engage young people on that discussion when it impacts on older people as much as young people. And similarly, housing strategies for the future are going to very much, you know, like Councillor Perks mentioned, I'm fast approaching the old category, and it would be good to perhaps consider sort of when you're undertaking any form of review, you expand who you talk to, because the future sort of plans that are going to need the aspirations of future generations, and what is fit for purpose now, it may not be fit for purpose for what people need. And I think it also sort of perhaps then demystifies the point that Councillor Morgan made about removing the scare factor, around removing the fear factor of what housing as an older person means going forward. And it would be good perhaps to widen sort of the net in terms of who we engage with and around this report and this strategy going forward. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Hennessy, then Councillor Morgan would like to come back in.
Hello,
Okay,
thank you for
Councillor
the
Hennessy.
sorry, thank you for the report, Nick. I just want to query something. As you know, most elderly persons who are in bungalows and things had a VCAS system in their property, and that got turned off on the 1st of March. So that was the technology to allow them to call someone in an emergency if they needed to. And this system was paid through their rent. Do we know what the uptake of the new system is? Because now that they have to pay for it themselves.
Yeah, Councillor Hennessy, I'm not sure the VCAS, you may be referring to certain specific sites where the hardwired scheme has been decommissioned. The hardwired, for other members who may not be aware, there was the technology, quite old technology, was overhead cables in many cases into properties to provide a telecare facility, really, so people could summon assistance if they needed it 24/7. The cabling and the technology is old, and what's been happening in some places, it's been deemed beyond economical repair, or the parts are no longer available. So what's been happening in some schemes is that that's been replaced by more a lifeline approach, where individuals who need and want the facility having individual lifelines into their property, which they can then, which serve the same purpose in effect, but don't rely on the aging sort of cabling system. So the telecare service is available to anyone in the Vale, and the people, the council tenants who've had that scheme in the past are offered that scheme. The take-up remains high, although some people have decided that they don't want to or need it, and those people have chosen not to get it, because it does serve a really important purpose. But similarly, we did receive some queries from some residents and say, well, like, I've moved into this accommodation, I don't want and I don't need, or I prefer not to pay for the service. Why should I have to? So that element of choice was introduced some time ago, really, and what we tend to find is older, more frail residents choose to continue with the service. Sometimes in the schemes which have maybe had the age designation reduced from 55 to over 40, some of those younger residents have chosen not to have that service. But if they change their mind in future years, and they want the service, then that is still available via a lifeline offering at the moment. Although they may, as technology advances and different sort of options, there may be different options down the line, but that service is still there, available to people if they should want it.
Okay, Councillor Morgan, you lowered your hand. Are you not wanting to come back in?
No, thank you. It keeps putting it. It seems to be on an automatic putting up all the time. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep an eye on it
today. Okay. All right, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, if I could apologise for joining the meeting slightly late. It's a question in relation to the retirement village in Penarth. in the document, it talks of the council developing around 135 units, and that some of these will be delivered as part of the retirement village. It was just a question: how, if only some of them are going to be the retirement village? In my view, a village would comprise more than 137 dwellings. So I just wanted to get a feeling for what the size of that would be. And obviously we talk about the retirement village being a combination of social rent and for sale. If we could have an indication as to the likely proportions as well, just so I can get a better idea of how that scheme is likely to be developed.
Just to pick up on the point, it's been tagged as a retirement village, but I think that's because most people think of older persons accommodation in one place as a village concept. It isn't a retirement village. It is bespoke provision of older persons accommodation in this particular locality, which is in the middle of an area of Penarth which is heavily populated with a whole range of alternative accommodation. It just so happens that the road into the development site, as I mentioned, lent itself to existing provision in terms of a sheltered housing scheme and an existing residential care home. In terms of the development site itself, the development is about an 80+ bedroom extra care scheme, which is built on the left-hand part of the site. On the right-hand part of the site is land that housing will develop, the council will develop in its own right. So in total, that's where that figure comes from. But in terms of tenure, the intention is that it will be affordable tenure. There is no intention at this stage, and in discussions that we've had, that the extra care accommodation will be for sale. This will be supplemented with grant provision, social housing grant provision, in order to ensure that the rents on those properties remain affordable for the residents who live there. So just to clarify, I guess those points there, Councillor Carroll.
Could I just come back, because in the document it talks of 135 units and that some of them will be for sale. I'm assuming then that means that there will be units developed for sale, but they won't be within that village.
We're not anticipating at this stage any units for sale on the Penarth site. I think the model in terms of extra care on other developments in other parts of Wales and other parts of the country, there are models of extra care provision that allow for multi-tenure within those developments. But if you take Golau Caredig as an example in Barry, which is the only other extra care scheme in the Vale, that's 100% affordable. There is no for sale in that scheme, and it isn't envisaged that there will be development for sale on this site either.
Because it does specify for sale in the document.
I think that might be an error in that, partners. It's a draft strategy. We'll right, amend that. We'll amend that point in the document itself.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that is all committee members who have spoken. Now, Councillor Wilson, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you very much for your patience.
That's all right. It's really interesting listening to other people's views. I mean, I think you all made some really interesting views about making sure that these developments must be sustainable, because I think, as you rightly say here, people in a locality largely want to stay in their locality because that's where their family and friends and their support groups are. And I think that is really vital. And also, as some people said, if some people do have a form of dementia, they're more likely to want to stay in an area that they're familiar with and close to people that will support them and love them, rather than going to another area. And I think, Councillor Morgan rightly said, lots of people do not like to be moved to a different location to be near maybe their children or whatever, and often that is the case. And as he's rightly said, that some of those people end up in care homes, and you know, it's not a good life for them. And I think you're rightly saying about the aging population. This is something that we do really need to address. We know it's been coming for a number of years, and still I'm still finding it amazed that, you know, lots of us are still not really waking up to the fact that we got a demographic time bomb, but we're now in that time bomb. It's not like it's going to be years ahead. We are where the baby boomers are now retiring or retired in many cases. And this is why it's not at all surprising. We have these issues. We have these great pressures on the NHS, on housing. And these pressures are not going to go away. If anything, they're going to get worse and worse and worse. So, you know, we've got to face up to that. And we've got to be honest with people and say, you know, the days of people who will think to themselves, actually, you know, we don't need to pay for X, Y, and Z are largely gone. We've got to be honest with people. And as we all know, we're facing a real cost of living crisis. We will not make life easy for anybody here. But we've got to be honest with people. It's not going to be easy. And as a cabinet member responsible for neighbourhood services and building services, you know, the budgets are under big pressure. You're talking about housing £20 million. So let's put it into context. In Penarth, you'd be lucky to get a bungalow for less than £500,000 each. All right. And that's the reality. So we're talking about, you know, 20 million doesn't go very far. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't. And although I know Halifax produced, I think yesterday, wasn't it, that their monthly cost has gone down a little bit. I think about 8% or something, quite high and quite shocking. But it's still got a long way to go before housing becomes really affordable. Therefore, we need more and more social housing. I mean, I'm sure all of us as councillors here, all right, that's my number one issue is housing and housing need. And I'm sure that you and like all of us here get very frustrated because we want to help out people. That's what we do as councillors. We want to help people out. And we find that we can't because we almost got 6,000 people on the waiting list. And that's the context that we're dealing with here. So we've got to try our best. And I think you're right. The strategy is about making sure that everyone can contribute towards it. But I don't want to see old people as being a homogeneous population. They're not homogeneous. They're different. You know, like everyone is different. They all got different needs and different wants. And, you know, and therefore we got to make sure we've got accommodation and housing which is adaptable to people's largely individual needs. And that will be costly, but I think you're right. We've got to have discussions with developers. We've got to make sure that they look for the future. And I always look, when I look for new housing schemes, I look for, well, hopefully it's those steps to a particular place if we can do it. If we can do a ramp, let's do a ramp rather than steps. But that, of course, that does add more cost in some cases, you know, but there are things like that. And I think, you know, disabled facility grants, we've got to make them easy to get. That's right. But again, we also got to be honest and say there's only so much money we got in the pot. And that's also the problem as well. So, you know, there's no easy solutions out there, but I think, you know, we've got to talk to each other, manage expectations as much as we can. And also, I would like to say is if people do have problems with their housing, and it is council housing or an OSL, which is social landlord, please report it. Don't wait until it's too bad. Please report it. It's much cheaper for the authority to get involved at an earlier stage rather than things get too bad where we have to do maybe structural changes or even decamp people into other accommodation. That's what we want to avoid. So, you know, I encourage people to report things, even if it's only a dripping tap and they can't find anyone to do it, because if that dripping tap could mean other things. You know, so please do that, and I urge you all to repeat that to the residents in your own particular wards. But thank you, and thank you for begging for my indulgence for speaking at a bit of length as well tonight.
No problem, Councillor Wilson. It's been a very for lack of a better term, popular topic tonight. There have been a lot of people wanting to speak. However, I do think we spent long enough on this item now. There is nobody else who wants to speak. I'm not going to add my further questions. If I have any, I will email them over. I think there's not really a recommendation for this as it's a reference from Cabinet, but there is a recommendation that the strategy and views of Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee be considered by Cabinet prior to the final strategy being agreed. And I'm sure that will be the case because we have made our views quite clear tonight as a committee. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next item agenda, but before I do so, yeah.
No, sorry, Chair. Go on. You were going to speak. Sorry.
No, I was just going to thank everybody for making the presentation and being here. But if you wish to go ahead, Mark.
In terms of this, did you obviously yourself, Chair, and the committee want to refer back to Cabinet with the comments made at tonight's meeting, and obviously then to go back to Cabinet just for final consideration before the report is finalised?
Yeah, it does need to be considered by Cabinet again so they can take in the committee's views. So yes, please.
Okay, we'll put some into that effect, including the comments that have been raised. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so thank you, Ian and Lois, for attending tonight and for the presentation. It was very, very informative. You are welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting if you wish, but please don't feel any pressure to do so. Go ahead and enjoy your evening.
Thank you for having us, and we'll leave you to your further discussions. Thank you very much indeed. Okay,
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. The next item is the draft Vale, agenda item 4, draft Vale of Glamorgan Council Annual Delivery Plan 2023 to 24, and Miles is presenting it. Hello, Miles, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that. It's a very good debate. I must say it's always quite sobering when I talk about over 55s and realise I am one, as is Mike. Very good debate, though. So thank you, Chair. This next report is a referral from Cabinet, and I'll try and explain it in simple terms. It's quite a hefty document. So essentially, the council has a corporate plan. Members be aware of that. It's the council's business plan for 5 years. It runs up until 2025. And the council has a legal requirement every year to produce what it calls an annual delivery plan. And we have to publish that plan. And Welsh Government will see that before the next financial year start. So just to recap, in terms of the corporate plan, we've got 4 objectives. So they are to work with and for our communities, to support learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, to support people at home and in their community. That's the main objective, I guess, of this particular committee, and to respect, enhance and enjoy our environment. Now, essentially, what I'm going to do today is take you through the main details of this report, and we're seeking committee's views as to the actions identified within the draft plan, which is subject currently to consultation. So as I say, we've got a legal requirement to produce this. In terms of the plan itself, we've got 6 themes. So I'll tell you what they are: Project Zero, infrastructure, transformation, care and support, hardship, and community capacity. So one of the things that we noticed when we were putting this plan together compared to last year's plan, which is my report later on the agenda, is the fact that even in the 12-month, the economic climate has changed considerably. So in terms of this particular document, it picks up some new challenges. So the cost of living crisis is a theme that runs right through it. Project Zero, so our commitment to the environment, is again a theme that runs right through it. And another one, organisational resilience. So members will know we're faced with severe budget challenges over the next few years. We're waiting for our settlement, which will be announced December the 13th. We're not optimistic about that settlement, so there'll be a challenging time ahead for us in delivering our services. So those have been woven into the new document. In terms of the actions in the plan, there are 59 actions. So if committee want to follow me in terms of this report, I would ask you to look at page 16 of Appendix A, which is in the report, and Objective 3, which is to support people at home and in their community. So I'm going to give you a flavour of the sort of things that are in there, the actions that are in this document. So I'll just run you through a few of them. I won't take you through all of them. So coordinate a response that supports our residents, businesses, the third sector and council staff with the impact of the cost of living crisis. Now that's a new one, considerably different to the previous plan. Everybody is feeling the pinch, particularly those on low income. So that's the first new action that's in there. Another action, take action to protect the vulnerable from illegal money lending activities. Unfortunately, when you get times like this, there are people that prey on those that are vulnerable. So in terms of SRS, we're doing much more work in terms of supporting the vulnerable from people who will try and lend them money and not the right type of people. Work in partnership to address some of the health inequalities that we've got. Again, with the sort of social problems we're facing, we get health inequalities. That's in the plan. Strengthen our arrangements with Cardiff and Vale University Health Board. So we're looking at more integrated models of care, including meeting accommodation needs, maximising council house building, and working with partners to reduce homelessness. So that's just a few of the actions within this plan relevant to this committee. This committee has an overall view of all those objectives, but that's just a feel of where we go in with this year's plan. So it's subject to public consultation as well. So I guess committee have read the document. If there's any actions that you think are glaringly obviously missing from that document, because this is essentially our 12-month work plan, please let us know, and we will have a debate on those and then take the matters back to Cabinet if that's what you wish. And the other thing to say, we have service plans, which are essentially the plan that feeds in to the annual development plan, and we will draft our service plans at the start of next year. So Mike has one for housing and building services, for example. Mike's actions within his service plan directly deliver the actions that we agree in the annual delivery plan. So it's all linked. It's what you've heard it called the golden thread. So it goes straight from our individual members of staff right the way through the governance process to the corporate plan. So it's an extremely important document because it is essentially our work plan for the next 12 months. So Chair, I'll leave it there. Hopefully I've picked out enough relevance that this committee will recognise and perhaps open it to questions.
Okay, I don't see any hands up at the moment. I just want to point out that during the agenda conference, it was suggested that an additional recommendation be added concerning an action to be added to the ADP concerning maintaining high standards in the maintenance of council housing stock, for example, addressing damp, mold, condensation, things like that, in light of the recent events with English properties following the death of that child from mold in the property and things like that. So that's we've added. Well, I'd like to add that. A committee happy for that to be added? Yeah.
Yes,
Chair,
Chair.
Chair.
Okay,
if
thank
you're happy,
you.
I've just scribbled something down, and obviously you can use your own wording, but there is this omission, I think, in terms of ensuring that our current stock is of its highest standard.
Oh yes, it's vital.
So I've suggested something like ensure that the council's housing stock continues to meet all relevant standards for both safety and construction. So I can send that to Mark, or I can say it again, Mark, if you're not very quick with your pen. So ensure, and if members are happy, ensure that the council's housing stock continues to meet all relevant standards for safety and construction. That's, I think, Chair, the sort of thing you'll be after, which then reflects our existing stock. There is an item, there's a number of items in the report about ensuring the new stock is of a high standard, but there's nothing that generally relates to existing stock. So Chair, that's for you and members to consider, but if you wish, we could take that back from this meeting.
Well, committee members are happy for the recommendation to be added, and I think the way you've worded it is pretty good. I couldn't do it any better, put it that way. And I can see a couple of people nodding, so I'm guessing they're happy with that themselves. Okay,
Yes,
so
Chair.
yes, I would be happy for that to be done. Councillor Perks, I can see your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the director, and I don't think you're going to be able to answer this, but you know, how will the cost of living crisis affect the implementation of this annual delivery plan? I mean, I'm saying you might not be able to answer it because we haven't had the settlement yet. We don't know what we're going to have, so you know, we're not going to know how it's going to affect it. But you know, obviously, there's different scenarios that you're probably putting into place. Will there be things that might not be able to be done on the annual delivery plan, do you think?
It's difficult to say, Chair. We've been asked as officers to look at all aspects of our service delivery and to look at a range of savings options up to 10% of our budget. So if I give an example of the budget for my directorate is around 20 plus million. So we'll be looking at around 2.8 million as a saving. But we spend 28 million every year on goods and services. So there's a potential for some of that saving to be made by more effective procurement, which we're looking at, and efficiencies in some areas. So we're certainly looking to deliver our services to those that are the most vulnerable. So in terms of the delivery plan, that's what it looks to do. And the savings options we're talking about as officers, I mean, members have not seen them yet, and you will have to agree them, are around that principle. There might be some charge and increases for certain services. I think some services have run quite a heavy subsidy. That's something we're also discussing. But there's always in the back of our mind as officers this issue of vulnerability. So we're hopeful of a positive outcome from the settlement. We're realistic, though, and we don't think that it'll be all the things we'd like it to be. So we're running at the moment through some scenarios, but I can give you an assurance that we are looking within those scenarios to basically protect those that are most vulnerable or in need. It's essentially what we always would look to do. But can I guarantee everything will be delivered as this year, next year? Not at this moment in time. Ask me on the 14th of December.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Miles. No, I know it's a tricky question when you don't know what you're dealing with, but yeah, I appreciate that. And you know, obviously, as we always do, sort of looking after the most vulnerable, and then if we got anything else extra on top, doing that as well. But thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, I can see you are waiting, but we do have another committee member waiting to speak. So I'll bring Councillor Lovelock Edwards in first.
Thank you, Chair. It was just two points really, Miles, and it's on page 14 in relation to the review of the core support service to offer to schools. Will that include a level of sort of raising awareness with governing bodies around the effectiveness that the service level agreements between schools and governing bodies gives good value for money? Because I'm aware that some schools are engaging with external HR consultants, which, you know, obviously, you know, from council perspective, sort of reduces the value for money with that service level agreement. And secondly, just on page 16 and on the point around the food and period poverty, taking into consideration the cost of living crisis, is there capacity to expand that in terms of raising awareness or giving support around fuel poverty? Because we know that that's very much going to be a key factor in these winter months and going forward as well.
Okay, Chair. So in terms of the first question about schools and the council's services that they provide to schools, I think in a time like this, when there's a potential for some of those services getting even more diminished because of the challenges that people face, it's more important for us to deliver in-house services to schools, albeit they must be of a sufficient quality. So it's one area that Mike and I have identified because we've lost a few school cleaning contracts over the years. It's a challenging one for us because, you know, we want to make sure that our cleaning staff are well paid and have good terms and conditions. And some contractors perhaps don't have the same principles as us, but we are certainly looking to work with schools to understand more what they require from us, and the sort of thing we're looking at the minute is whether we can put ancillary services together. So I'll give an example. We are providing the external sports booking service for the new Whitmore High School. So our staff will let the pitches for them, the 3G pitches. It's just an early initiative, and the idea is we will start with that, and then we'll add additional services to that. So I'd like to think that we'd be in a position to provide schools with a whole range of ancillary sort of non-education related services in future years. And we have had issues with our own quality. You know, it's not a school's fault or school's problem. We need in some of our areas to be better, which involves talking to the heads. But yeah, one of our clear aims is to try and get more of our services into schools. And with that, we'll get economies of scale. For example, if we're dealing with the heating systems, we'll be able to get larger contracts with lower unit rates for them. So yeah, it's definitely one for me. In terms of your second question, I may have to take that back and get a response from my colleagues, because it's not a matter I'm directly involved with, but I'm happy to do that, Councillor.
Thank you, Miles. Thanks very much.
Hang on, I've lost right, okay. So Councillor Wilson, you can come in now. There is no, oh, hang on, sorry, Councillor Perks, your hand is still up. Are you wanting to come back in, or is that a legacy?
Sorry, Chair, it's legacy.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Wilson, you can come in now. There are no other committee members waiting to speak.
Oh, thank you very much on this. I mean, obviously the annual delivery plan is obviously a real challenge given the cost of living crisis, and it's going to be hard, but we are we're very serious about it. And in particular, I'm very serious about protecting the vulnerable people in the Vale Glamorgan in particular. That's something we really got to make sure we protect, because that's what we as a council are about, protecting the vulnerable, protecting those people who are most in need. And I think that is vital. Going back to the point about mould, though, again, I would like, I've all emphasised the point I made in a previous agenda item, is that if people think there is mould and it's growing, please report it to us. Please, you can email me. That's, because that's one of my responsibilities, building services. Or email Margaret, Councillor Wilkinson, or email, Contact One Vale, and go through that way, because as soon as we know about it, as soon as we can act upon it as well. And I know but also it's very much a temptation at the moment, and we do understand and appreciate it, because, insulation is important, and we understand that. But that could be one of the areas where mold could spread, because when you seal a house up or a flat up, you don't allow things to circulate and air to circulate and to get out. And really, a house is a bit like us. It's got to live, and it's got to have it. Air's got to circulate widely, and we had a lot of that through COVID, didn't we? Because obviously we've got to try and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, because that makes us sleep and everything. And the whole point of that is to get air from outside as well as inside. But as you know, because air from outside, especially this time of the year, it's getting cold, people tend to seal up homes, and that can make things worse. So, there is something that needs to be done about that. There does need to be, perhaps, and we all perhaps a bit guilty of it, is more education, so that people know how to live in their homes. But it's difficult. It's not easy, especially with modern devices like dryers in particular, that could cause a lot of these problems as well. And when people do live in crowded conditions, that doesn't help either. But I would like to emphasise, it is important that people do get hold of us, at an earlier stage. If you do see spores growing in a property and it continue to grow, then please let us know. It is vital. And if you don't get anywhere, please email me. So, sometimes, officers, we're all very busy people, but that's one of my roles, so I do get involved sometimes when things, and often there's some very good reasons why things get delayed, but just let me know. And that's one of my jobs. So thank you.
Okay, Heather, you had your hand up. Are you wanting to come in? You're on mute.
Right, I'm off me now. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we've brought up issues in our houses of mould. Is where the roofs have been redone and there's no vents being put in. Now, I went up my attic today and everything is absolutely soaking. It's buckets of water. They put...
Oh, I think there's something wrong with the sound. I can't hear you, but you're not muted.
Sorry, Heather, you've lost the sound. Can you just sort of mute and unmute yourself again just to see if that works?
It's gone.
Sound's
Yeah.
gone. Maybe unplug your headset and plug it back in. That seems to happen at work when it happens to me in work.
Yeah, that might work. You're quite right, Chair.
I know it sounds silly, but sometimes the simplest thing works.
No, try that. Try that, Heather. Try and unplug your headset. Plug it back in. Heather, can you try and talk now? Yeah, hang on, unmute yourself. I think there's some sound then.
Well, that's just as long as you can hear me.
We can hear you now.
Right.
No, stop now.
Oh, it's gone again.
Sorry, Heather, the sound has gone again. It might be a cable on your headset. Are you able to unplug and just use the microphone on the PC? No, I think we've lost sound, Heather. So, what I might suggest, Chair, if Heather's got an issue or question, if she perhaps forwards that on to me, I can forward it on to Councillor Wilson, say, to address some of the issues that she already started to touch on tenants and the issues with the roofing and installation.
I think that would be the best bet because it seems that there are technical issues getting in the way again. So yes, if you could forward your request on, Heather, and we will send it on to Mark.
Chair, could I help in respect to this, in that I know the issue that Heather has raised. We have raised this with our housing assets team, and on a small number of properties we have identified where there is insufficient ventilation in the roof space. So we've heavily insulated the outside of the property, we've heavily insulated the roof space, but where warm air is going into that roof space, clearly it's very, very cold because there's no warmth getting into the roof space. So what we are doing is, where we identify this, we're going and retrofitting in additional ventilation in the roof space, which hopefully will address that issue and will ventilate the roof area. So we are aware of the issue, but if Heather hasn't reported that, or if there are residents in Heather's group that haven't reported that, then we'll get in touch with Heather and we'll get a list and we'll go and inspect those properties.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on that item? Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, these are references from Cabinet. There was the additional recommendation about the existing housing stock maintaining their high standards. Would committee be happy for this to be referred back with that additional recommendation added? Yes?
Yes,
okay.
Chair.
All right, and Miles, I'll leave it to you and Mark to work out the wording on that one. Okay.
I'll be in touch, Miles. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
all right. Okay, thank you. So the next item is agenda item 5, the initial housing revenue account, budget revised, budget 2022 to 23 and proposals 2022 to 24. And hello, Laura, you can take the floor.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. If members will forgive me, it's quite a technical report, this one, so I've got a briefing note to try and summarise the issues rather than go through the actual report. So if you'll bear with me while I go through that one. This report sets out the revised housing revenue account HRA budget for 22-23 and the initial HRA budget for 23-24. A large element of the funding for the HRA revenue budget is from the HRA reserve. The balance on this HRA reserve brought forward as at the 1st of April 2022 is over £17 million and is currently higher than had been budgeted due to lower capital expenditure incurred last financial year. So in order to bring the level of this reserve down to a more prudent level, the revised 22-23 HRA budget has been increased from a deficit of 11 million to just over 16 million pounds. This additional drawdown will bring the reserve balance back in line with the level required in the 22-23 housing business plan. The initial 23-24 HRA revenue budget shows a budgeted surplus of £26,000. It assumes a reduction of £12.7 million in capital expenditure funded from revenue, bringing the revenue budget contribution to £5.7 million. This would leave an anticipated balance on the housing revenue account reserve of £949,000 as at March 2024. Significant cost increases in 23-24 include capital financing due to additional borrowing and increased interest rates and higher repair costs due to an increase in supply costs and schedule of rates. This report, which was written some weeks ago, mentions that the rent policy notification was due imminently from the Welsh Government, and I can update members now that this has been received and is currently being analysed in readiness for a revised business plan for 2023-24. Welsh Government are responsible for rent cap limits, and as inflation is in excess of 3%, this year, the responsible government minister has exercised her discretion and applied a 6.5% capped increase for the coming year, 2023-24. The current challenging environment with high inflation and supply costs, cost of living crisis, additional borrowing and high interest rates will all impact on the viability of our housing business plan. Up until now, a rental increase of 2.75% has been assumed for the 23-24 business plan, but other rates are also currently being modelled to ensure the continuing viability of the 30-year business plan. The finalised 23-24 housing business plan will be presented to Cabinet on the 5th of January, along with the final HRA budget proposal for 23-24, in order that the statutory deadline to notify council tenants of the new rent and service charges can be met. Scrutiny Committee is requested to pass any comments on this report back to Cabinet by the 14th of December. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carroll, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Laura, for the report. Two questions, please, Laura. The first one is in relation to the provision for inflation of 136,000. Is that going to be sufficient? It seems quite low given the size of the budget in general and the current levels of inflation. And secondly, I found paragraph, where is it? The spend on, I will find it in the budget, in the papers for you, the spend on consultants of £15,000. I was just wondering if you could highlight what that expenditure was for, please.
Thank you, Councillor. I might have to call in on Mike's services to comment on the consultant, as I'm not actually, I don't actually deal with this budget myself, so hopefully Mike can come in on that one. As far as the inflation, obviously there is an element of an estimation as far as the forecast, because we're talking 23-24, so there's an element of forecasting. So obviously there's an element of the but those are the figures that we've been advised that we should be increasing by the various rates mentioned in that paragraph 2.13. So that's what we are being advised, and that's what we've been working on at the moment. Obviously, there is a an amended business plan being looked at the moment. So if any of those are to be increased, then obviously that will be updated for the January report. But that's what we're being advised to use at the moment. Mike, are you able to answer the consultant's question?
Yeah, bear with me a second. Just to pick up on the inflation, just to add to what Laura has said, please bear in mind this is the housing revenue account. Most of the impact for inflationary costs and pressures will be on the capital works that we undertake. So this is inflationary pressure on the revenue account itself, rather than, as we know, building costs going out of control, etc., etc. So we will see within the business plan a greater impact on our capital programmes and the budget provision under housing capital. In terms of the second point, consultancy, we're using consultancy at the moment for the new housing and building services ICT system. We've engaged a specialist ICT consultant to provide us with services in discussions with the software provider who is providing our new housing and building services ICT system. And that person is assisting us and ensuring we have sufficient capacity within the team to deliver the programme.
Okay, is there anybody else who would like to speak on this? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Yes, thank you. Can I refer you to page 5, please, and to point 7? Could you just clarify for me in terms of what you say that the reason for the provision for bad and doubtful debts has been reduced? Could you just explain what was the basis for that and why it's been reduced? Just could you clarify that point for me? Because I'm sorry, but I don't quite understand 2.7. Thank you.
Look, Laura, I think that's one for me, and it's historical. Previous assumptions in the housing business plan assumed a 6% bad and doubtful debts, and our business plan, as you know, is a 30-year business plan, but obviously we amend that annually, and we're required to provide that to Welsh Government and to members. The 6% was predicated going back to the welfare changes, the original welfare changes, and the implementation of the spare room subsidy, universal credit, and the whole range of changes to the welfare system. And we were anticipating substantial bad debt provision. That has not been realised. I put that down to the work and the investment the council has made in our income teams, both in terms of our rent recovery teams, but also our financial inclusion team, our team who provide a lot of financial support, and obviously for each pound I spend on that service, they get tenants pounds and pounds back in terms of access to eligible benefits, grants and other forms of subsidies. So all this is doing in terms of the business plan is actually saying, well, we don't actually need to make a 6% provision anymore because the arrears aren't at 6%. The arrears are increasing, however, and as you can see, the report is saying this provision takes us to the end of March 2023, and it may well be that when we're looking at our business plan now in next November, we may make a different assumption, because we're very, very concerned about the impact on our tenants. It is difficult, and Laura mentions the rent cap provision. There was an awful lot of lobbying from local authority landlords as well as RSL landlords that it's a bit like a spend to save initiative, isn't it? To some respects, because we want to invest in our homes. We've just talked about mould and dampness and condensation and unfitness. We want to invest in our homes and make them warm, safe, secure. Equally, we've also talked this evening about we need to increase the amount of council housing, social housing that's available, because there's a huge shortage. That unfortunately costs a lot of money, and as members will be aware, the way that we afford that is to borrow. And in order to pay back our borrowing, we clearly have to look to our rents to support those borrowing costs. So the Minister has indicated a 6.5% cap in Wales. Interestingly, UK government in England announced a 7% cap in England. The Minister is keen to identify that 6.5% is not a target. I think the Minister is acutely aware that even though 75% of our tenants will not be affected by a rent increase because they receive universal credit or housing benefit that will cover the increase in their rental costs, there's a sizable minority, clearly the 25 or 30%, that would be impacted by a rent increase. And clearly some of those people are going to be people who are in low paid employment. They may have a number of jobs, and as a result of which, I'm sure the considerations of Council and Cabinet will be key in sort of coming to a rent increase that not only caters for our needs in terms of trying to reduce costs in the future for our tenants, but also recognises that inflation is running at such a high level at the moment. You know, rents are going to have to be tapered. You know, because, you know, we've seen what the impact of inflation is in private rented sector at the moment, where many private sector rents are becoming unaffordable for many of your constituents. So just to flag that point really, so in terms of answer your question, it's historical. We're not seeing levels of bad debt provision there, but we will reflect on it at the end of this year and see where we are at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, does anybody else have any further questions or would like to speak? I'm not seeing any hands on screen or in the chat function. Nobody seems to be raising their hand. Okay, so the recommendation on that is that that Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee be requested to refer comments to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee as the lead scrutiny committee in order for their views to be forwarded to Cabinet. Are we happy with that recommendation?
Happy.
Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Right, just to check. Sorry, Chair, just to check in terms of that, what are we referring to corporate performance? Are we simply noting the report, or are there any specific comments to go back to corporate performance?
I don't think there were any specific comments raised, were there? They were mainly questions, but there weren't really comments.
Okay, that's fine, Chair, because we can simply note, if committee are happy, simply note the report.
Can note it, yeah.
And you know, and leave it at that. It's only if there were some burning questions or recommendations the committee felt should go to CPR or corporate performance, then it would be referred on. But if you're happy simply to note it, then we can do that as well. It's entirely up to you, Chair and committee.
A committee happy to note?
Happy to note, Chair.
Okay then. Okay, so thank you very much, Laura. Again, you are welcome to stick around, but you really don't have to. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, so agenda item 7 is the Corporate Safeguarding Mid-Year Report, and I believe that is Mike, if you would like to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, this is a regular update report to all scrutiny committees, including this one. The report originally went to Cabinet in 17th of November, I think it was, and has been referred to all scrutiny committees for consideration. It probably wouldn't be helpful for me, I don't think, to dwell on the background of the report, in that I think that's been well rehearsed previously, other than to say corporate safeguarding is a major consideration for this council. and as a result of which we spend a lot of time, effort, energy in ensuring that our corporate safeguarding responsibilities are met. In saying that, what I would say is that obviously things change, policies change, and we reflect on national and local reviews that will change our safeguarding practice, and you'll see from the report in front of you there's an indication of that happening in the last mid-year report. But if I just reflect on some of the more general themes in the report, and if I take you through to key issues for consideration in the first instance, you'll be aware that there is a corporate safeguarding group. I'm a member of that group and represent the directorate, Miles's directorate. We meet on a quarterly basis, and as you can see, we share areas of priority and emerging themes. So, for example, areas for this committee's consideration, and we will have brought reports on a fairly regular basis for you to consider, particularly around the area of violence against women and domestic abuse. So the VAUDA strategic work that we do, how does that link with other parts of the council? Well, it links through the corporate safeguarding work that we do, and a lot of that work is monitored not only by this group but also by the Safer Vale Partnership, which again is a conduit for that area of activity. But we meet, as I say, on a quarterly basis, and in terms of priority areas of work for this year, we've developed those in 2.4. So the development of a safeguarding data report, a review of our safeguarding training and our accompanying materials, development of work group to focus on areas of learning from reviews, developments in response to audit and wider quality assurance activity that can support the work that we do. As you can see in 2.6 onwards, there are various themes that we've identified. So, for example, in corporate leadership and accountability, since the last report, we've reviewed our council's corporate safeguarding page, and we've updated our membership of the various groups due to new appointments and changes of personnel in the council. In terms of corporate policy, we've reviewed our induction and training responsibilities within our safeguarding policy. We have an updated safeguarding policy which is in draft at the moment and will be coming to Cabinet, and I'm no doubt will be referred to scrutiny committees in due course. In terms of scrutiny and assurance, I think the focus there and what we would want members to be aware of is that this policy applies to all local authority employees, volunteers and contractors, and we make obviously those individuals aware of consequences of non-compliance with our policy, but we're looking to provide or develop a dashboard style report, I suppose similar to the report that you'll have in a moment from Miles, in terms of updating activity and focusing our minds or our gaze, I suppose, on those areas where that need more attention. In terms of our safer recruitment, just to flag that there's 100% compliance in Q2 this year across corporate schools and directorates, and what that means is that all recruitment, all new staff will either have the relevant safeguarding report in place, the data protection, sorry, not data protection, DBS in place, and if there is not a DBS in place, that there's a relevant risk assessment plan in place which is available for a temporary period whilst we will be waiting for the DBS to be provided. That's often the case in our schools because clearly a lot of recruitment activity takes place when the schools are closed, or in periods when the schools are closed, when we have new staff starting at the start of a term, and it may be a few days before the DBS checks are in place. But we put in place a risk assessment process, which is signed off by a number of senior officers to ensure that there are no risks to our children or individuals. Moving on to training, there is the launch of the new National Safeguarding Training Standards, which was due to be launched last month, which will involve a suite of new training modules. And we're currently reviewing our IDEV mandatory training to take account of that new Group A training module, which is mentioned there. We also reflect on the fact that schools and governor training is being supported by our education safeguarding team, for which we have oversight, and we've been making obviously some suggested areas of development which is supported by the corporate safeguarding group. So it's very much a light touch midterm report, which effectively is just giving you an update on some of the activity that's been undertaken over the last couple of months. A fuller report will be coming later on in the new year, which will be the full annual report, which will give you the bells and the whistles and data and information in relation to safeguarding activity that's been happening across the council. I'll leave it there. Happy to take any specific questions.
Okay, yeah. Having been on this committee since 2017, I'm fairly familiar with the safeguarding reports by now. But I'm aware that some of our newer members may not be aware. So this is an opportunity for the newer committee members to ask any questions and get any queries going. Do we have anybody who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Tumbleweeds. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. I'm assuming we're noting that report as well. Cabinet happy to do so? Sorry, not Cabinet. Committee happy to do so?
Yes, Chair.
Happy to do so.
Okay, all right then, thank you very much. So thank you, Mike, for that. It's been a very informative evening. Thank you. So agenda item 8, the final, the last but one item is annual delivery plan monitoring report, quarter 2 performance 2022 to 23. And I believe Miles is taking the lead on this, and I think Mike and Nick are going to be jumping in as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, what I'll do, if you're okay with that, I'll ask Mark to share the presentation, which is appended to the bottom of the report.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, gives you the snapshot of the performance to date for the second quarter for this committee. So if I can share that for me.
Yeah, bear with me. Miles, just putting it on now. Bear with me a sec.
Okay, so this is the second quarter performance, and I mentioned to you before about the new annual delivery plan. This is a measurement of performance about the current annual delivery plan. So I hope it all makes sense to you. But this is essentially the measurement of a performance for quarter 2 of a 4-quarter, 12-month delivery plan. So we'll go on to the next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so this is the council-wide. So you'll see on the left-hand column there, you've got overall actions. So we've essentially got 2 measurements. One is actions. Now, that is what I mentioned to you before. That's the service plan and the annual delivery plan. So that's, have we done what we said we were going to do, essentially, by the second quarter. And then the next column there that says overall PIs, we have a series of performance indicators that measure our performance against those various objectives. So we take an average essentially of the current position. So the box you'll see, the column you see on the right hand side shows a RAG rate in red, amber green rating of green. And that's our best estimate for the position as we are now on the second quarter. But that's the whole council. So we go on to the next slide, please, Mark. So there's a couple of boxes here. I mentioned before there are 4 objectives. So there's a few boxes here which are just a snapshot on what we've achieved. So I'll just draw your attention to a few of those that will be relevant to this committee. So the second bullet point there, objective 1, data captured via the tenant profiling exercise, particularly important to us because it enables us to target our efforts in terms of things like money advice, dealing with financial hardship. Really relevant at this moment in time, as you'd appreciate. So that tenant profiling is very much ensuring that we get the best use of our limited resources by targeting them in the right place. Objective 3, the last bullet point there, another really good one, but sad to have to report such measures. So 100% of domestic abuse victims reported feeling safer as a result of our interventions, and that's our community safety team. So as I say, it's a pity we have to report that, but it does show that when we get involved, when we're aware of the situation, our interventions are improving the quality of lives of those affected. Objective 4, Penarth Food Pod continues to grow in popularity. Again, a shame that we have to celebrate such things as food pods, but that's where we are at the moment. And then the last one, environmental improvements works on the site of Buttrells, improving the garden areas and fencing. So just a snapshot. We could have had a lot more on there. The council's house building programme goes from strength to strength. So there's generally a lot of good work going on within the area. So next slide, please, Mark. So this shows the snapshot of performance. I've already said to you that the council's running it green. This shows the snapshot of performance in respect to this committee. I won't go through it, but at the end of this document, there's a series of spreadsheets with a lot of colour on them, and that shows all the actions and all the measures for the council. In the right-hand column, you'll see there's a scrutiny committee named, and what it does, it actually relates the particular action or measure to the particular scrutiny committee. So in our case for this committee, we've got 55 actions and 6 measures. So 95% of those actions are shown as green. 83% of the measures, the performance indicators, are shown as green. So what we tend to do with this report, we report by exception. So rather than go through all the things that we say we're doing well, we tell you the things we're not doing so well. So I'll take you onto that now in a moment. So next slide, please, Mark. So a couple of areas where we've got to improve before I take you on to the areas that are red. So objective 2, I mentioned previously, the Wales Legal Money Lending Unit. We need to do more work in that area because there are too many loan sharks out there that we're not actually catching. So we're doing more work in that area. Objective 1, too many households remaining in temporary accommodation and for too long. I mean, I've never, you know, Mike will support me when he answers questions on this later, but I've never known a situation with housing challenges for many reasons, such as those we face today. And it was quite right what Councillor Wilson said. You know, we really need to increase the amount of supply that we've got for all ages and all family types, because you know we are in a crisis in terms of our ability to house people. And then objective 3, continuing to provide advice and support to citizens in light of the cost of living crisis. It's a problem now as well as it will be next year. So I know Mike's money advice team are extremely busy and providing some really good outcomes, but we have to continue our focus in those areas. So next slide, please, Mark.
Sorry, Miles, I think that is the last slide.
Oh, there's on the report. I should.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Bear with me a second. On this particular appendix or the exception report.
It's Appendix B. Sorry, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll flick over to that one now. Bear with me a second.
Okay,
That's no noise, no problem.
I just want to take members through the reds, Chair, just so that you can see where we're not actually doing as well as we would like to, and perhaps I'll ask Mike to comment because at least one of them is in his area. Thank you, Mark. That's it. Okay, so the first one relates to mobile working, maximising our opportunity with ICT. Mike's already spoken about consultants that we have engaged at the moment dealing with a new ICT package for our residents and for our maintenance. And then the next one is to do with holiday parks and SRS. With the second one, we have planned to do this work, but it'll be later in the year. The actual review of site licensing conditions is not half as challenging as the one above. So I'm fairly confident in terms of the second one. And perhaps, Mike, I'll just hand over to you for a bit of commentary, Chair, if you're happy with that in terms of the mobile working point.
But yes, Miles, it's actually the mobile working solution. As I mentioned earlier, we're undertaking, all directorates are undertaking, divisions taking ICT review. This is specifically about our shared regulatory service, and part of the work that we're doing as a council is clearly looking at the benefits that we've had in terms of our agile working over the last couple of years. I think it's fair to say there is so much activity going on in terms of ICT development. We've only got so many officers that can actually support that. In fact, I think Councillor Carroll raised a question on the same matter about consultancy. It is extremely difficult, but we can see that the benefits, both in terms of efficiency of service and customer service, gaining from this. But I think, clearly it's a case of where are the priorities at the moment in dealing with the here and now. And I think that's one of the issues that officers are facing at the moment. Miles, if I take you to the final action for housing, which is the performance indicator for
homelessness
prevention.
Yeah.
So we've previously, prior to the COVID pandemic, we had an exceptional service in relation to preventing homelessness. And as you can see, our target that we'd set for this year based on previous years was at 70%. Clearly, what we've seen as an issue is that the bounce back following COVID has not happened. We continue to have to utilise our bed and breakfast accommodation across the 3 hotels that we currently use, even though there has been some movement out to those hotels. So some of the new developments that came on stream this year, we have been able to rehouse particularly some of the single people and the couples that occupy the majority of the bed and breakfast. As we move people out, there are people moving in. We've also unfortunately had to have a waiting list even for our temporary accommodation, and particularly our family accommodation instigated this year, and that's never happened in my career, and shows, I guess, the difficulty we have in terms of supply and demand at the moment and the pressures that communities are under. So, for example, we have some shared accommodation, we have some of the council-owned accommodation that we use as temporary accommodation. We have people under Section 21 notice, i.e. their landlords have asked them to leave. And we're saying to those people, unfortunately, you will have to stay where you are until you are legally required to be removed from that accommodation. That doesn't mean we're going to wait for bailiffs to attend, but what it means is that those people can't be rehoused at the point that we know that they've been issued with a no-fault eviction effectively, and the council will then have to pick those people up. Unfortunately, I can't see this situation improving in the short term, and as you can see, performance is decreasing. Q1, Q2 is worse than Q1. What we are looking to develop at the moment is a rapid rehousing plan that will take account of members on this committee that were part of a task and finish group from a previous scrutiny committee. came up with a series of recommendations, and a number of those recommendations will form part of the rapid rehousing proposal that we'll be coming forward with shortly. So things we'll be looking at is looking at our allocation policy in order to increase the priority for homeless clients, for example, than is at the moment. We'll be looking at potentially issues around de-designation of existing stock. We'll be looking at the potential of shared accommodation within the council housing stock, so that if there are groups of people who are known to each other, for example, friendship groups that may be homeless, perhaps in those situations, rather than individual properties being identified, perhaps sharing arrangements could be implemented in those circumstances. Whole range of other things that we're looking at. We're looking at the incentives for our landlords that do provide accommodation for us to improve the numbers of private rented accommodation that may become available. But at the moment, as I say, we are struggling for private rented accommodation, and that was the area that we discharged a lot of our duties into before homelessness became the reality. Those opportunities are not forthcoming at the moment. Rents are exceptionally high in the Vale of Glamorgan. Cost of living pressures on those buy-to-let landlords who have been providing accommodation for some of our clients. They're under their own pressures, I guess, in terms of the interest rates, in terms of their loan repayments. And of course, it's a perfect storm at the moment, in terms of fuel costs and everything else. However, as I say, we are developing a plan to try and improve that situation, but that won't be improving, unfortunately, I don't think, in the short term, which I've mentioned earlier today. Thank you, Miles.
Hey, Chair. So it's really good performance for the period in terms of numbers and actions, but this one is a committee will appreciate it's an absolutely huge challenge for Mike and his team. And they need to be commended to get to that position, I have to say, because it is I know Mike all the years and the challenges in his area at the minute. I don't think he's seen the likes of, but we're optimistic. We're always aspirational, but it's going to be challenging for quite some time to come. So good performance overall. Could do with more houses.
Couldn't we all?
Yeah. But I would like to offer my thanks to Mike and his team, particularly in that homelessness section, because it's never ending, the pressure in that team. So members are asked to provide their comments on the Q2 performance, Chair, as presented.
Yeah, I am aware of the challenges involved in that last action with the Section 21s, etc. There was a requirement from Welsh Government during COVID for local governments to house everyone who presented as homeless. There was a shortage of housing before that. Rents have gone sky high, as you mentioned. There's a lot of private landlords are selling and getting out of letting houses because the reforms coming in and making it tricky for them. Prices of mortgages, prices of insurance. There's all sorts of issues. So you are fighting a very big battle, and I do appreciate the effort your team and yourself are putting into this, so thank you very much, and I'm sure the committee appreciate it as well. I'm going to bring Councillor Hennessy in now.
Thanks both of you for the report. On the last action, Mike, what's going to happen with the homeless who are staying in the hotels at the moment, the three of them, when the Welsh subsidy runs out in March next year?
That's a very good point, Councillor Hennessy. As part of our consideration of next year's budget, clearly that is something that is constrained. It is something that's the top of our agenda. It's part of our budget considerations for next year. It's quite likely those costs will have to be met next year in the event the Welsh Government doesn't find additional funding between now and next April. I have an element of reserve at the moment that will enable us to continue to use bed and breakfast accommodation for a period of time. But there is a burgeoning pressure here on the council, and those pressures are well understood, and clearly will form part of your considerations as political considerations, council's considerations in terms of setting your budget for next year. But we will have to continue using bed and breakfast for the foreseeable future, no doubt.
Okay. I was lucky enough to visit the 2 hotels in Roos and meet some of the residents down there. I know land is very short at the moment that the council actually do own. As I used to live in Lantford, I know where Eagleswell School used to be. Is there a possibility of building more of those pods down by the police station for the homeless on that site as a temporary measure?
So yes, I mentioned earlier the rapid rehousing plan that we talked about earlier. Whilst government have made capital funding available for local authorities and other housing association partners to potentially look at bringing more accommodation online very quickly. One of the areas that this council is looking at is our existing land holding, what we would call our meanwhile sites, Councillor Hennessy. So land that we're intending to build on in future, permanent housing in future, but that won't be happening in the next year or so. We are seriously considering a number of sites across the Vale for meanwhile sites. One thing I would point out is the majority of people in our hotel accommodation are single people. And clearly, I've mentioned that we also have huge pressures in terms of some of our families. We've got 40 or so families at the moment in temporary accommodation, which, you know, they're not in bed and breakfast. You know, let me stress that they're not in bed and breakfast, but they are in temporary accommodation, and the move on is difficult. So we're looking at a range of options. Clearly, we also have a development programme. There will be other options in terms of permanent housing in the next 12 months as other properties come online. So, for example, some of the developments in Barry, former Seaview Labour Club, the Castle Hotel, a number of other sites as well that are in development at the moment with partners. But yeah, we're leaving no stone unturned, Councillor Hennessy. That certainly is a consideration. Clearly, as part of those considerations, we will obviously want to consult with local communities, as we do in terms of any of our developments in any area, whether it's permanent housing or whether it's temporary housing, and we will do that in due course. But there are some late stage conversations and discussions, let's say, and we have some plans which we will be able to facilitate with the drawdown of that capital grant from Welsh Government.
Thank you. I can't praise you enough. The work you're doing, and with Miles, it's tremendous. But thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, is there anybody else who would like to make a comment or ask a question? I'm guessing that's a no. I can't see any hands up on screen or in the chat. Okay, so as I said earlier, and I'm sure many of the people in the committee appreciate the effort and the fight that you guys have ahead of you and the effort you've been putting in. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to pass our thanks back to your team, and of course yourself. But I don't think anybody has any comments so much to refer back. So are we happy to note this?
Happy to note.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair. Happy to second.
Okay, thank you. Well, in that case, I will thank everybody for their time. It's been an informative evening. I have no items under agenda 9. You'll be pleased to know you can go and enjoy your evening. Thank you all for coming today. The date of this next meeting now will be just the 9th of January. It has had to be rescheduled due to a special council committee. I'll start that again. It has had to be rescheduled due to a special full council meeting being called. So enjoy your Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody. And I hope to see you all hearty and hale in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Merry
Thank you,
Merry
Chair.
Christmas.